À-bas-le-ciel.
Here are 5 problems I have with your behavior. Number 1, you don't shut up about being vegan. Veganism isn't a bad thing, but it's not something that you need to tell us about all the time. You can probably just go ahead and keep it to yourself. And I'm not trying to start a war with vegans with this video. I think a lot of vegans out there, you wouldn't even know they were vegan.
À-bas-le-ciel.
So her position is there's nothing wrong with being vegan if only you can keep it to yourself, if it's just your little dirty secret. And you know, this really runs parallel to discussions about gay rights that I can remember from the 1980s. I am old enough to remember the 1980s, kids. You actually cannot sustain the position ethically that there's nothing wrong about homosexuality as long as you keep it to yourself. It's not sustainable on the small scale of just one gay person, your gay best friend, your gay cousin, your gay brother, your gay coworker. And it's also not sustainable when you scale it up and look at a society of millions of people in which there are at least hundreds of thousands of gay people. It's not. But it does actually take some work. You have to invest your imagination, your intellect, into really thinking on the knock-on consequences, the indirect consequences of homosexuals concealing their sexuality. And their sexuality is only one part of their identity. It might seem harmless to say, and again, back in the 80s, many people thought it was harmless to say. Many people did not consider themselves homophobes, but they still maintained that if they have a coworker who's gay, they don't want to know about it. If they have a cousin or a brother or a friend who's gay, it should all just be kept secret, and that way society could just keep rolling on. Well, in a sense, it could. In a sense, you could have a society where absolutely all homosexuals have to live in the closet, and where every day they have to live with the inconvenience of people offering to set them up on a date with their sister, which they're not interested in because they're gay, or coworkers asking about their roommate and them having to make up lies about why it is they go to Disneyland with their roommate, which is kind of weird if you're heterosexual, or, you know, their grandmother asking them why they haven't had kids yet, or this kind of thing. There's a lot of awkwardness on that one-to-one level. And beyond that, there's also an element of living in fear. Long term, if the whole society stays in the closet, if everyone lived by Bill Clinton's principle. That was Bill Clinton who set up the principle of don't ask, don't tell. He thought you could have the military work with all the gays being in the closet, and it doesn't work. It does not work. You don't get 10 guys living in a tent together. You know, you don't get guys in the sniper corps living in such close quarters for such a long time and not knowing about each other's sexuality. It's ridiculous. I mean, on that level, the one-to-one scale is ridiculous. But the next step I wanted to take with this is not just the one-to-one scale. What if your position in the army is that you can be fired at any time if the reality of your sexuality is confessed? What if you are a fireman or a school teacher? And the school board that you work for, their position is that if anyone is known to be a homosexual, they can be fired. And maybe you get called in and asked about it. Maybe you have a meeting in the principal's office where you're asked about why you live with your roommate, not with a girlfriend or a wife, or, you know, why you haven't had kids yet. And you're being interrogated for that. You're being persecuted for that. Over time, what is it that creates the social conditions, the cultural change, and the legislative change, the new laws that today protect the rights of homosexuals in the classroom, in the fire department, in the army? What brings that about? Is it secrecy? Is it living a lie? Is it making people like you more comfortable by just keeping it to yourself, by treating it as a secret? No. We had to have like 10 billion awkward conversations, coast to coast. I'm Canadian, not American, by the way. But coast to coast in Canada, there were a billion awkward conversations. I mean, really, the 1980s, I could say, was the turning point where there was this cultural change of saying, no, you're not just going to sit down with your grandmother and say, yeah, I don't have kids yet. Maybe you'll have grandkids next year. You know, no. Where people actually said, look, Grandma, I'm not going to have kids this year. I'm not going to have kids next year. I'm not going to have kids ever because the guy who's my roommate is not really my roommate. And I think a lot of grandparents thought, yeah, I'd always suspected that. I mean, in most cases, it wasn't right out of the blue. In some cases, I'm sure it was. I mean, if you have gay friends, a lot of them say, well, what do you mean? You dated that girl back in high school, whatever their story is. Different families have different stories. But sure, on that 1-to-1 scale, there were a billion awkward conversations. But this connects to, on a larger scale, on the social scale of society as a whole, people organizing themselves into foundations, into advocacy groups, into lobbying groups, influencing government, influencing public education, ultimately bringing about legal changes that protect your status in the office, in the school, in the army, where you cannot be fired for your sexuality, where you're not obliged to live a lie. Now, homosexuality, it's a really interesting comparison to veganism. I really often say to vegans, don't compare the future of the vegan movement to the abolition of slavery or the history of the American Civil War. You know, homosexuals managed to fundamentally change our culture, our legal structure, their status in our society without a civil war. Right? It was a very fundamental change in our society that was brought about within democracies by democratic means, and without too many people being shot dead on the streets. It's really a largely nonviolent, very fundamental change. And that's one that vegans can learn from. However, in this woman's line of critique of vegans, it's also worth contrasting just how many times veganism comes up in a day or in a week, in a month, at your workplace, compared to homosexuality. Now, this is my personal opinion. I think when you start a new job, when you have a new workplace, a whole bunch of new coworkers, at first there are a few discussions pertaining to your sexuality, whether those are polite or impolite. When you first show up, people want to know if you're single, if you're available, or if you're married or otherwise off the market. People want to know if you're gay or you're straight, what's up with you. Normally when you first start a job, there are a couple of conversations and a little bit of gossiping, and then it fades into the background, unless things suddenly change. Unless while you're at the job, you get divorced. Whatever. But it's not something that comes up every day. It's true, and that's very different from being in the closet. But, you know, if you're gay at the workplace, unless you work at a strip club, you're not going to talk about it day after day, every day. It's not going to come up with your boss and your coworkers. And the reality is, almost no matter, even if you do work in a strip club as a vegan, it's amazing how it comes up every day. Even if you don't want it to, even if you're tired of talking about it, if you don't want to witness to other people, you don't want to preach, right? My boss here in China, there are several different people I could describe as my boss. I work at a university, so everyone's my boss. All the other professors are my boss. But my boss invited me to go out to dinner with her family, with her husband and her kid. So that's a formal workplace invitation. I actually went to the restaurant first to check it out, and at that restaurant there was not even one thing that was vegan. It was a soup restaurant. Absolutely all the soup had meat stock, meat oil. There was no way anything there could be vegan, and it stank too. You know, the boiling meat, really a horrible stench for a vegan. I don't think meat eaters like that smell either. So, you know, I had to turn down that work engagement. As a vegan, day to day, it's really impossible to be in the closet. And please understand, I am not saying this as a joke. But if I just go out to coffee with a coworker, just coffee, I have to explain, no, I can't eat this cookie that came with the coffee because it's not vegan. Oh no, I have to send this back. This has milk in it. It will come up. It will come up. And if you're gay, you know what? That coffee, I don't think anyone should live in the closet, don't get me wrong. But it's also not something that's going to be mentioned 3 meals a day. And it's not like you're going to sit down in the coffee shop and say, I'm not really comfortable with this coffee shop. It's too heterosexual. It's not like you're going to say, I can't drink this coffee. This is straight coffee. Why can't they make gay coffee? It's not like you're going to say, no, this cookie, this is not gay enough for me. All right? Send me email. Send me comments in the comments if you're an exception to the rule. I've never had a gay friend who had that kind of attitude. Like, I've never had a gay friend who says they only eat at gay restaurants. Right? Or asks when the waiter comes, is there a gay option on the menu? Yeah, I don't have any gay friends like that. I've known a lot of gay people. So, again, I realize her approach here is fundamentally unsympathetic. She's not interested in seeing it from our perspective. But if you think homosexuality comes up too often in the workplace, in school, with coworkers, with your family and friends, whatever it is. Because, sometimes you may be a little bit bored of hearing it. You may think, oh, Jim, he's always talking about his sex life. I don't really want to hear it. Life is full of those, minor sources of friction and conflict, personality conflict, sure. But you should be able to appreciate that even in the workplace, even if it's just going out for coffee or going out to dinner with your boss or with coworkers, that veganism actually is something that comes up all the time, even when we don't want to talk about it. And when you scale it up, our problem of scaling it up is actually much worse than it is for homosexuals, because homosexuals are a huge percentage of the population. And vegans are unlikely to be more than 0.5%, right? I have no idea the real number of how many people are gay. It is vastly more than 0.5%. And some gay people are born rich, and some are born poor, and some of them are lawyers, and some of them are architects. And they have the proven capacity to form the civil society organizations and the lobbying groups they need to defend their rights and give themselves a voice in the democratic system. And vegans, so far, we really don't have that. There are a lot of differences. Vegans are a self-selecting minority. We're not randomly distributed the way gays are. You'll find gays everywhere. You'll find them in Texas, again, among rich and poor in all walks of life. And you don't find vegans in all walks of life, right? You find them here and there in little strange pockets. A lot of vegans in Portland, Oregon. But, even if you go to the most right-wing town in Texas, you're going to meet plenty of gay people. Shout out to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Always remember the gay club in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Wow. Anyway, look, when you scale it up, we need to go through a similar process to advocate for our issues in a democratic society. We need to identify one another, get politicized, get organized, and give a voice to the issues that matter to us. We, for example, are not comfortable seeing school children taught in schools that cow milk, is healthy for them, that chicken eggs are healthy for them. As a very real scientific fact, those two things are not true. We don't even have to get into meat here. Let's just stick with those two examples that are fundamental to the modern American diet and the modern Canadian diet. We know as a scientific fact that no human being should ever eat chicken eggs. They are that unhealthy. And dairy is not that far behind. It is fundamentally bad advice to tell a child that they should eat cheese. We want to change a matter of legal policy, a matter of culture, a matter of education. We want to change what children are taught about food. Sure, we'd also love to see questions of animal rights and ethics and ecology included in the curriculum. But on that very simple level, why do you have egg industry propaganda in the classroom? Why do you have dairy industry propaganda in the classroom? Can we change that? And taking it all the way back to the 1980s, to me, that's very closely parallel to a time when there was Catholic propaganda in the classroom, when there was Protestant propaganda in the classroom, when instead of having education that's realistic about condoms and contraceptives and sexually transmitted diseases, when children were, I remember the 1980s, when children were being taught things about homosexuality and about heterosexuality, when children were being taught really fundamentally dangerous and scientifically false propaganda about sex in the classroom. We want to change that, right? And you can look around today, but I think there's no comparison. I think even in the Catholic school board, what they now teach children about gays in Canada, I have looked into that. It's a very interesting question. That's 180 degrees different from what children were taught about homosexuals in the 1980s. So it's a fundamental change. It's a change that doesn't just relate to the awkwardness of me having to eat dinner with my boss, of me having to communicate to my coworkers where I do and do not stand. It's a change that ultimately links to questions of culture and public policy in a dynamic way. What the future of the vegan movement should be is debatable. But I'll tell you one thing right now. It's not debatable that the way forward is for us to go back in the closet. The way forward for us and for you cannot possibly be for us to keep it to ourselves.
À-bas-le-ciel.